In 1945, the war intensified. Young male students were sent to battlefields and female students to factories. I was 15 years old and sewed military uniforms for soldiers who went to the battlefields. At one stage, all we did was to sew buttonholes or put on buttons. Since we worked in 4 shifts, we sometimes had to work in the middle of the night. After coming home in the morning, I would then go to dressmaking school during the day. One day, on my way to school, I found a beautiful red parasol for sale in a shop. In those days, the Japanese government told us to live according to the slogan, "Luxury is the enemy." As my father was a strict retired army officer, when I asked him to buy me that parasol, his answer was a definite no. But I pleaded with him again and again. Eventually, he gave in and bought me that parasol saying, "Never take it out, leave it at home."
August 6th was a Monday and I didn't have to work. My father happened to be out of town on prefectural government business, so I went out early in the morning with the red parcel, breaking the promise I had made. I was supposed to meet 4 of my friends at Yokogawa Station at 8:30. We were planning to have a picnic in the suburbs of Hiroshima. My best friend, Miss Imanaka, and I were waiting for 3 other friends under the red parcel on the tram platform. I was wearing a white blouse and long silk navy blue pants with a white check-like pattern. After a while, I heard the roar of a B-29 bomber. People around me looked up at the sky and screamed, "Oh, something is falling from the sky!" I saw a great, big, bright, white flash and felt covered with heat. I don't remember hearing an explosion, but apparently I was blown off the platform by the blast. I fainted and was unconscious for a while and then found myself lying on my stomach on the tram tracks. I felt my whole body burn up. I held the parasol, which was now just a little bit tightly in my hand. Below my knees, my pants had been burned away, leaving the white check-like pattern dangling as if that part had been meticulously cut off with scissors. I did not know what happened to my friend Miss Imanaka, who was with me. I never saw her again.
I managed to get up. Not knowing what had happened, I felt completely lost. Half unconsciously, I followed the tracks, dragging my burnt legs. I felt terrible pain in my legs and found them burnt below the knee. I saw bodies lying everywhere. Many tracks overloaded with bodies passed by. It was then that I finally realized that an unbelievable disaster had happened. The whole town was filled with casualties, people suffering from burns, people with serious injuries, and people asking for help. While aimlessly wandering towards the north, I found rice paddies filled with around 8 inches of water. I took a rest and soaked my burnt legs in the water. As far as the rice paddies continued, I repeatedly sat in the water because the rest helped me to get up and walk once again. After I had walked for 4 or 5 hours, a total stranger called out to me. Her name was Miss Hashimoto, and she was a little older than I. She noticed my burnt legs and kindly took me to her home. She said, "I heard that Hiroshima was bombed. We can go to the center of Hiroshima tomorrow. I am going to look for my younger sister who is missing."
I finally felt alive again after having many cups of cold water from the well. The Hashimoto family were farmers and they kindly treated my burnt legs by putting on cucumbers sliced in thin sheets and applying the juice squeezed out of them as a home remedy. They offered me white rice, which was unexpected as it was hard to come by during the war. They let me stay for the night. When night fell, I saw a sea of flames making the sky over Hiroshima red. I was worried about how I would live from the next day, thinking of my hometown Hiromachi with nothing to be left of it, no home, no neighbors, and no friends. The following mornings, my burnt legs still hurt terribly, and I could not figure out who to ask for help. After serious talks, I decided to go to the house of the Kiritani family in Takehara, east of Hiroshima City, where my brother had evacuated. Miss Hashimoto gave me a pair of wooden sandals as I had no shoes. She offered me a ride to Ground Zero on a bicycle-drawn cart.
Charred corpses were scattered here and there, and the car could not pass without running over them. A train was completely burnt, leaving the passengers who had been riding it burnt to death. I got off the cart at Aioi Bridge near Ground Zero because Miss Hashimoto was going in the opposite direction. She gave me 5 yen saying, "Take this with you." Just after we departed, I crossed the bridge and found 3 horses burnt as if they had been smoke-dried. Some soldiers were also burnt in the same way. I saw a mother and child hugging. They might have been separated, but reunited by chance in the ruins. I thought it was good for them to be together again, but I remember feeling almost no emotion in the midst of such a hell-like situation. Many trucks passed by, loaded with corpses. The number of the dead was unbelievable. Bodies were burnt to charcoal, unrecognizable, crushed under destroyed buildings or walls. I had to step over many of them to get by.
Many victims used the last of their strength to reach the river in order to cool themselves and drink water, only to die there. So many rotten and swollen corpses were floating like rafts, going downstream, covering the surface of the ordinarily beautiful body of water that Hiroshima was famous for. After walking 7 to 8 kilometers to the east, I finally reached Kaitaichi Station and took the train to Takehara. I got to the house of the Kiritani family in the evening. Mamoru, my younger brother, seemed more surprised than happy to see me. Mr. Kiritani was a teacher of yokyoku, traditional Japanese no songs. Mrs. Kiritani, who was in her 40s, carried me on her back to a dermatology clinic. The first doctor we saw had never seen burns caused by radiation and did not know how to treat me. Mrs. Kiritani did not give up and found another doctor who put ointment on my burns. After we got back from the doctor, she laid me on a futon, removed the discharge running from my burns, and changed the bandages and gauze many times a day. She nursed me very gently for 2 weeks.
According to what I heard later, my father, who had been in Onomichi on business, hurried back to our house in Hiranomachi. He was relieved to see my stepmother and my 7-year-old sister Akiko, who had safely evacuated to the sports ground at Hiroshima University. However, as there was no way for him to know that I had reached the Kiritanis in Takehara, he kept walking around Hiroshima every day looking for me. He also went to my mother's grave at Senganji Temple in Zaimokcho, which was not far from Ground Zero. Although all of the tombs there had been collapsed, only my mother stood upright, having been jolted by the blast to face east, and this convinced him to think, "Hiroko is still alive somewhere in the east." A few days later, Mrs. Kiritani visited my family all the way from Takehara to tell them that I was safe and being taken care of. At the time the war ended, I was still at the Kiritanis. I thought now we could live in dignity, able to turn the light bright, and sleep with no fear at night. The occupation army was scheduled to come, and my father, concerned about my safety, sent me to Hagi in Yamaguchi Prefecture. My mother's parents' house was there, and my grandfather was still well. I transferred to a girls' school and began living there. My burnt legs had still not healed, and I could not foresee them being healed even by the following spring.
I graduated the next spring and returned to Hiroshima. I visited Miss Hashimoto and gave back the 5 yen she had given me as train fare. I showed my deep gratitude for her kindness, which gave me peace of mind. However, after hearing that her sister hadn't been hanged, I felt so sorry and could think of no words to express my deep sympathy. Without the red parcel, I too would have surely died from severe burns and been carried by a truck to be buried somewhere, no one knowing what had happened to me. After the war, I visited Mrs. Kiritani. Although she did not mention it while taking care of me, she told me how bad my legs had smelled from the injury. I told her that I was feeling the same at the time and could not stand it. It was the first time for me to talk about the terrible smell. I remember the smell of the atom bomb, or perhaps what we may call the smell of Hiroshima. It being summer, the bodies rotted quickly and were infested with maggots. The seriously wounded survivors were also covered with maggots. The discharge from the wounds and burning bodies and city clung to our clothes as one smell. It must have been a miracle that I did not have any maggots on my legs. I get very emotional when I think of my 15-year-old self doing my best to survive, dragging my burned legs, passing the dead bodies, walking as far as Takehara.
For many years, I have suffered from several illnesses with no satisfactory medical explanation. In 1955, I got married and had a son and daughter. My son lives in Tokyo, and my daughter is married living in Santa Rosa, California. I have survived surgeries for thyroid tumor, gastric cancer, and ovarian cystoma. My husband supported me through them with his understanding and affection. For a long time, I have been troubled by a strong pain in my legs below the knee. I have sometimes felt that it would have been more merciful not to have survived, rather than suffer from such pain. Despite my agony, I have tried to be positive and lived on till today. 1995 was the 50th memorial year of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. I published an anthology of haiku as a requiem for the souls of the victims, including my friends. My husband and I visit our daughter Emiko in Santa Rosa, California once a year. Santa Rosa is a peaceful town. At night, the sky sparkles with many stars like gold dust. During one of my visits, I happened to meet Father Eric Fried, an acquaintance of my daughter. I felt he had a wide range of views on Japan, sometimes even wider than as Japanese. He appreciated my haiku anthology and translated it into English. It seemed his hope was to inform people in America of the tragedy of the atomic bomb.
Sometime around the year 2004, I was asked by Father Fried to talk about my experiences at St. Vincent de Paul High School in Petaluma, California. He interpreted, as I told my story, of what I saw as a 15-year-old girl, the miserable state of the city after the blast, my 60 years of anguish as a survivor, and the publishing of my haiku anthology dedicated to victims. Around 400 students and teachers quietly listened to me. At the end of my speech, I said, although I cannot forgive the dropping of the atomic bomb, I really love the people of America. I concluded my speech saying, if I were to live another life, I would like to be a star, shining with the victims who had lost their lives. I received a warm round of applause and a beautiful bouquet of flowers. As long as my health allows, I will attend the annual Hiroshima Peace Memorial Ceremony and pray for the souls that were lost.
戦後、広島市民は原爆犠牲者たちに過ちを繰り返さないと誓いました。それから数十年後の今、世界は核戦争の瀬戸際にあるかのようです。広島の体験を語り継ぐことが一層重要ですが、被爆者はあと10年程度で姿を消します。それゆえに私は広島の若い方たちが私の被爆体験を朗読してくださったことに感謝するとともに、次の世代がさらにその次の世代に広島のメッセージを伝えられることを願っています。